They didn't scream at first. That was the part the galaxy would later remember with a quiet, gnawing dread, the absence of panic. When the first transmission reached Earth, fractured and bleeding static across every receiver it touched, humanity did not erupt into chaos. No sirens. No frantic evacuations. No righteous declarations of war. Just listening. Please, anyone, they are not conquerors, they are not. The message died in a wet burst of distortion, like something choking on its own fear. Across Earth, analysts replayed it thousands of times. Linguists broke it down. Intelligence agencies cross-referenced it with every known alien dialect. Militaries ran simulations based on the tone alone. It wasn't just a distress call. It was a warning. The second transmission came 8 hours later. Cleaner. Colder. More terrifying. They were the bones of our children. That line didn't just travel through space. It burrowed into the human psyche like a splinter that refused to come out. In Washington, Moscow, Beijing, Delhi, leaders stopped talking mid-sentence when it was translated. In underground command centers and orbital defense platforms, seasoned veterans of a dozen proxy wars suddenly felt something old and ugly stirring in their gut. Not fear. Recognition. Humanity had done terrible things in its own history. Things that didn't make it into textbooks without careful editing. There were chapters humanity preferred to pretend were fiction. But this wasn't strategy. This wasn't war. This was appetite. The invaders, the ones the message warned about, called themselves the Karzier. They didn't negotiate. They didn't occupy. They didn't enslave. They erased. Entire systems went dark. Not conquered. Not subjugated. Silenced. Scans of those dead worlds showed no survivors, no infrastructure, no recognizable life signatures. Just absence. As if reality itself had been scraped clean. And yet, scattered among the ruins, long-range probes detected movement. Things walking through the ashes. Wearing what they had taken. The Valori, once a dominant power in their region of space, had begged their allies for help. They were ignored. Or worse, studied. No one wanted to be next. So they turned to the newest, most unpredictable species on the galactic stage. Humans. A species that had clawed its way out of self-destruction more than once. A species that had a habit of turning desperation into innovation. A species that smiled too easily for something with such a violent past. It took exactly 9 hours for Earth to respond. Not with a message. Not with a warning. With coordinates. 3 weeks later, something entered the Sol system. The Karzier didn't arrive like a fleet. They arrived like a disease. Their ships didn't glide, they slid, like oil across water, ignoring the comforting rules of physics. They swallowed light, bending it around themselves so that looking directly at them felt wrong. Painful. Sensors struggled to lock onto them. AI targeting systems produced contradictory data. Even simple optical feeds seemed to distort, as though reality itself didn't quite agree on where those ships were. Animals reacted first. Birds dropped out of the sky mid-flight. Dogs howled and hid. In the deep oceans, entire pods of whales changed direction at once, fleeing toward the abyss. Humans noticed. Humans always noticed patterns like that. By the time the Karzier reached Earth's orbit, every major defense system was already active. Satellites repositioned. Weapon platforms aligned. Hidden installations, ones that didn't officially exist, powered up for the first time in decades. Still, humanity said nothing. No greeting. No threat. Just silence. The Karzier paused above Earth, their fleet spreading out like a predator circling prey. They scanned the planet, probing its defenses, tasting its electromagnetic signature. And then, without ceremony, they fired. A beam of annihilation energy tore toward Earth's surface. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't plasma. It was something more fundamental. Something that didn't just destroy matter, it denied its right to exist. Cities would have vanished without a trace. Oceans would have boiled into nothing. History would have ended in a single, indifferent instant. The beam never landed. It struck something invisible, something that hadn't been there a fraction of a second before. And shattered. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Shattered. Fragments of that impossible energy scattered across the upper atmosphere, dissolving into harmless light. For the first time, the Carzier hesitated. They had never seen a species block that weapon before. They adjusted. Prepared to fire again. That's when the humans arrived. They didn't come from Earth. They came from everywhere else. Human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect, terrifying synchronization, behind the Carzier fleet, around it, above and below it. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands. Their designs were brutally functional. No elegance. No wasted lines. Every surface was armored, every angle optimized for war. They looked less like ships and more like arguments, cold, deliberate statements of intent. And unlike the Carzier, they were loud. Engines roared across every frequency. Communication channels flooded with overlapping signals. Targeting systems painted the void in aggressive, unmistakable patterns. Humanity wasn't hiding. Humanity was announcing itself. The lead vessel, a massive carrier with a hull scarred by battles it had clearly survived, broadcast a single message. Welcome to Earth. The tone wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't afraid. It sounded tired. Then the fleet opened fire. The first human volley didn't aim for the ships. It aimed for the space between them. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Gravity twisted. Distances warped. The Carzier formation fractured as regions of space stretched and compressed unpredictably. Ships that had been flying in tight coordination suddenly found themselves isolated, separated by impossible distances or shoved into unstable pockets of warped physics. Their sensors screamed contradictions. Navigation systems failed. For the first time in their recorded history, the Carzier lost formation. Human missiles followed. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. They didn't fly in straight lines. They hunted. Swarms split apart, reformed, adapted in real time. Some detonated early, creating cascading shockwaves that forced Carzier's ships into vulnerable positions. Others burrowed through defensive fields, adjusting their composition mid-flight to counter whatever resistance they encountered. One Carzier vessel simply vanished as a missile punched through its core and detonated from the inside. Another was caught in a lattice of energy that constricted slowly, methodically, crushing it like a hand closing around fragile glass. But the Carzier were not helpless. They adapted. Their ships opened. Not like hangars. Like mouths. Organic structures unfolded from their hulls, wet, glistening, wrong. From within, beams of living energy lashed out, writhing as they moved, seeking, tasting. One human destroyer took a direct hit. Its shields held for half a second. Then they didn't. The beam didn't just burn through the hull, it ate it. Metal softened, warped, turned into something biological, something that pulsed and grew. The ship screamed across comm channels, not a mechanical alert, but an actual sound. Raw. Human. It died slowly. And every second of it was recorded. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, far below any map or satellite scan, a man watched it happen. General Marcus Hale didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just watched. They adapt quickly, an officer said, his voice tight. On the main display, a Carzier ship shifted its structure, its next attack already compensating for human countermeasures. Hale nodded once. Of course they do. They're learning our tactics. Hale leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. So we stop using tactics. The room went still. That wasn't a figure of speech. Everyone in that room knew exactly what he meant. Sir? Another officer hesitated. You're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. Hale interrupted calmly. I'm done pretending this is a war. He reached forward. His hand hovered over a sealed control. For a moment, just a moment, there was something like hesitation in his eyes. Then it was gone. They came here to feed, he said quietly. Let's show them what that means. He pressed the button. Release the archives. Out in space, the human fleet changed. Order dissolved into chaos. Ships broke formation, scattering in unpredictable patterns. Communication channels filled with noise, laughter, fragments of old broadcasts, distorted signals that made no tactical sense. To the Carzier, it looked familiar. This was how civilizations died. Structure collapsing into panic. Discipline giving way to fear. They surged forward. Confident. Hungry. They had seen this ending before. They opened their ships wider, revealing the full horror of what they were, vast, internal maws lined with structures that pulsed with anticipation. They were ready to consume. That's when the first anomaly appeared. It didn't arrive. It didn't travel. It simply existed. One moment there was empty space. The next there was something that should not have been. A massive construct, if it could even be called that. Its shape defied coherence, shifting subtly every time you looked at it. Parts of it flickered in and out of existence, as though reality itself couldn't maintain a stable definition. Carzier weapons fired instantly. Beams struck the anomaly and passed through it. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, it laughed. Not over comms. Not through speakers. Inside their minds. A deep, resonant sound, layered with something ancient and profoundly wrong. And then it moved. Not through space. Through position. It was suddenly inside the Carzier formation. And it began to tear. Ships didn't explode. They unraveled. Their structures came apart at a level deeper than matter, peeling away as if rewritten by an unseen hand. Organic components shriveled. Metallic frameworks twisted into impossible geometries before collapsing into nothing. The Carzier recoiled. For the first time since they had entered this galaxy. They hesitated. Back on Earth, no one spoke. The screen filled with more anomalies. More archives. Things humanity had built and buried. Weapons from wars so catastrophic they had nearly ended civilization itself. Ideas that should have remained ideas. General Hale watched them deploy with a grim, quiet acceptance. Sir, an officer whispered. What if we can't control them? Hale didn't look away from the screen. We never could. And out in the void, as the Carzier began to understand what they had awakened, something far older than war stirred. And for the first time in a very, very long time. It was smiling. The things we buried. The first Carzier ship tried to run. It didn't get far. Space folded in on itself like a closing fist, and the vessel stretched, physically, impossibly, into a thin line before snapping back into nothing. No explosion. No debris. Just absence. The rest of the Carzier fleet reacted instantly. They didn't panic. Not yet. They adapted, reconfiguring their formations, their living hulls shifting like muscle under skin. New structures bloomed across their surfaces, weapons evolving in real time to counter what they didn't understand. But understanding required rules. And humanity had just turned those off. The anomaly drifted, if drift was even the right word. It pulsed in and out of existence, its shape never quite settling. Every sensor that tried to read it returned something different. Mass readings fluctuated between 0 and infinity. Thermal signatures spiked into nonsense. One probe claimed it was older than the universe. Another insisted it had never been born. Then it spoke again. Not in language. In memory. A Carzier warship froze mid-maneuver. Its internal systems flooded with images that weren't its own. Burning skies. Cities collapsing under nuclear fire. Human voices, screaming, laughing, cursing, layered over each other in a chaotic symphony. War. Endless, brutal, creative war. The ship tried to purge the data. It couldn't. Its biological components began to seize, rejecting the input like a body rejecting a virus. But the memories kept coming, not just of destruction, but of something worse. Persistence. Humans didn't stop. They didn't know how to stop. Even when they were losing, even when the cost was catastrophic, they kept going. Adapting. Improvising. Turning scraps into weapons, desperation into strategy. The Carsier's ship convulsed. Then it tore itself apart from the inside. Across the battlefield, more anomalies appeared. Each one different. Each one wrong. One looked like a cluster of shattered ships fused together, rotating slowly, as if gravity had forgotten how to behave. Another resembled a massive, skeletal structure, its bones made of light that flickered in unnatural rhythms. And then there was the one the humans called choir. It arrived silently. A long, slender construct, almost elegant compared to the others. Its surface shimmered with faint, shifting patterns, like waves on water. It didn't attack. At first. It sang. The sound spread across every frequency at once. Not loud. Not violent. Just present. Human crews heard it as music, strange, haunting, almost beautiful. Some recognized fragments of old earth melodies buried within it. Lullabies. Funeral hymns. War marches. Each listener heard something different. The Carzier heard something else entirely. Their ships began to slow. Movements became sluggish, uncoordinated. Their organic systems pulsed erratically, as if struggling to maintain rhythm. The song wasn't just sound. It was structure. It rewrote timing itself, introducing delays where there should be none, accelerating processes that needed precision. Weapons fired too early or too late. Defensive responses misaligned by fractions of a second. In battle, that was enough. Human ships surged forward, exploiting every mistake. Railguns thundered, launching slugs at relativistic speeds. Plasma batteries carved glowing scars across Carzier hulls. Boarding pods slammed into exposed surfaces, drilling through layers of living armor. And inside those pods, humans waited. Contact in 30 seconds. Sergeant Elias Vorn checked the charge on his weapon for the third time. It wasn't standard issue. None of this was. The rifle hummed softly, its core glowing with a dull, unstable light. Around him, his squad sat in silence. Veterans. Every one of them. The kind of soldiers who had survived too many wars to believe in clean victories. Anyone else hear that? One of them muttered. The singing? Vorn replied. Yeah. He paused. It reminds me of home. Vorn didn't answer. The pod shuddered as it punched through the Carzier hull. Organic material resisted for a moment, flesh-like, elastic, before giving way with a wet tearing sound. The hatch blew open. Move! They poured into the ship. Inside, it wasn't metal corridors or sterile chambers. It was alive. Walls pulsed with slow, rhythmic contractions. Veins of bioluminescent fluid snaked across surfaces, casting dim, sickly light. The air was thick, humid, and carried a faint metallic tang. The Carzier defenders came fast. They weren't drones. They weren't soldiers. They were something in between, twisted forms that looked like they had been assembled from pieces of other species. Limbs that didn't match. Faces that didn't belong. And yes, some of them wore bones. Human bones. Vorn didn't hesitate. Burn it all! His squad opened fire. Their weapons didn't just shoot, they unmade. Targets hit by the beams didn't bleed or fall. They broke apart at a molecular level, unraveling into fine, glowing dust. The Carzier creatures screamed. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pain. It was confusion. Back in the command bunker, General Hale watched the boarding feeds with a grim expression. They're not used to resistance like this, an analyst said. No, Hale replied. They're used to prey. On the main display, the battlefield was shifting. The Carzier were adapting again. Faster now. Their ships began to synchronize despite the choir's interference, their organic structures evolving countermeasures in real time. New sensory organs bloomed across their hulls, allowing them to perceive the anomalies differently. To see them. That's not good, someone muttered. Hale's eyes narrowed. No, he agreed. It isn't. Because the moment the Carzier understood what they were facing, they changed tactics. They stopped fighting the human fleet and started targeting Earth. A new weapon formed at the heart of their largest vessel. It wasn't a beam. It wasn't a projectile. It was a rupture. Space itself began to tear, a growing fracture that bled darkness into the surrounding void. Sensors failed to interpret it. Visual feeds glitched, unable to render what was happening. But one thing was clear. If it reached critical mass, it wouldn't just destroy Earth. It would erase the entire system. Time to impact? Hale demanded. 2 minutes, came the reply. Silence fell over the room. 2 minutes wasn't enough. Not for conventional response. Not for strategy. Hale exhaled slowly. All right, he said. Enough restraint. He turned to a different console. This one didn't have warnings. It had names. Most of them were redacted. Most of them were classified beyond even his clearance. But one was still visible. He hesitated. Just for a second. Sir? An officer pressed. Hale's jaw tightened. They wanted monsters, he said quietly. Let's give them the worst one. He activated it. Out in space, everything went still. Even the anomalies paused. Even the choir fell silent. For a brief, impossible moment, the battlefield held its breath.
Then something arrived. Not with distortion. Not with noise. With finality. A single human ship. Small. Simple. Unremarkable. It didn't flicker. It didn't warp. It just was. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. The Carzier weapon, mid-formation, stuttered. For the first time since the battle began, the invaders stopped. Every sensor, every organism, every mind in the Carzier fleet turned toward that one ship. And deep within their collective consciousness, something ancient stirred. Recognition. Not of the ship, but of what it carried. Inside the vessel, a lone figure stood. No armor. No weapons. Just a man, staring out at the impossible. He spoke softly. Not to the fleet. Not to the enemy. To something else. Permission to proceed. For a moment, nothing answered. Then, a voice. Old. Tired. Endlessly patient. Granted. The man closed his eyes. And smiled. Back in the bunker, every screen went white. Every system crashed. Every sensor overloaded. General Hale didn't move. He just whispered one word. God help them. Out in the void, something opened. And the Carzier finally understood. They had not come to conquer a species. They had come to a graveyard. And humanity was what crawled out of it. What answered back? The light didn't fade. It collapsed. Not outward, not like an explosion. There was no expanding wave, no bloom of destruction. Instead, the white swallowed itself, compressing into a single point so dense it seemed to pull thought along with it. Then it blinked out. For half a heartbeat, the battlefield went quiet. No sound. No motion. No time. And then reality resumed, wrong. Every Carzier ship felt it first. Not as damage. As subtraction. Pieces of them simply weren't there anymore. Not destroyed, absent. Entire sections of their living hulls erased without trace, without residue, without memory. Their internal system scrambled, trying to compensate for structures that had never existed. They recoiled as one. For the first time since their species had risen from whatever abyss birthed them. The Carzier experienced something they did not have a word for. Fear. The small human ship still hung there. Unchanged. Untouched. Around it, space had become clean. Too clean. The distortions caused by the earlier anomalies had vanished, replaced by a perfect, sterile stillness. Like a surgical field. The massive rupture the Carzier had been forming, the system killer, flickered, destabilized, then froze mid-growth. It didn't collapse. It hesitated, as if unsure it was allowed to exist. Inside the ship, the man exhaled slowly. His name was Daniel Cross. Once, he had been a physicist. Then a soldier. Then something else entirely, something the official records refused to define. Now he was a door. And something was stepping through. "Easy," he murmured, not to himself. "We're still inside the lines." The answer wasn't a voice this time. It was pressure. A presence unfolding behind his thoughts, vast and ancient and utterly disinterested in anything resembling mercy. Daniel winced. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know. They started it." That seemed to satisfy it. Barely. Out in the void, the Kazier adapted again. They always did. Their fleet reorganized, faster now, more desperate. The organic structures of their ships shifted violently, mutating into new configurations. Sensory organs opened, vast, lidless things that stared directly at the human vessel. They were trying to understand it, to classify it, to reduce it to something predictable. That was their mistake. The first Kazier ship that fired at the small vessel didn't miss. It couldn't. The distance was negligible. The weapon was precise. A lance of writhing, living energy slammed into the human ship. And stopped. Not against a shield. Not against armor. It just stopped. Suspended in place like an insect trapped in amber. For a second, nothing happened. Then the beam turned. Not reflected. Not redirected. It changed its mind. It bent backward, folding in on itself, and surged back toward the Kazier ship that had fired it. The vessel tried to compensate. Too slow. The beam struck its own origin point, and instead of exploding, the ship simply ceased. Gone. Not destroyed. Not even erased in the conventional sense. It was as if reality had decided it had made a mistake. And corrected it. The Kazier faltered. Across their network, something rippled, an instinct older than their current form, something buried deep in whatever passed for their collective memory. This wasn't prey. This wasn't even an enemy. This was a boundary. And they had crossed it. "Sir, what are we looking at?" an analyst whispered in the bunker. General Hale didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the readings, what little of them still made sense. Energy levels that didn't obey conservation laws. Spatial distortions that weren't distortions anymore, but decisions. Even the anomalies, the earlier monsters humanity had unleashed, had pulled back, orbiting at a cautious distance. Like wolves giving space to something bigger. Hale finally spoke. "Containment breach," he said quietly. "Containment," the analyst echoed. Hale nodded once. "We didn't deploy a weapon." He swallowed. "We opened a door." Inside the Kazier fleet, something new emerged. Not a ship. A response. Their largest vessel, the one that had begun forming the system killer, split open along its length. Layers peeled back like flesh, revealing something vast within. An intelligence. Not distributed like the others. Centralized. Ancient. It had been watching. Learning. Waiting. And now, for the first time, it focused entirely on one thing. The small human ship. The void between them warped, not with distortion, but with attention. The two forces regarded each other across a gulf that suddenly felt much, much smaller. Then the Kazier intelligence spoke. Not in sound. In meaning. "You are not prey." Daniel blinked slowly. "Well," he muttered. "That's a start." The presence behind him stirred, amused in a way that made his teeth ache. The Kazier continued. "You are not food." A pause. "What are you?" Daniel considered that. Then he smiled, a tired, very human expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're the ones who survived ourselves," he said. "And you," he added softly, "picked the wrong graveyard." The response was immediate. The Kazier intelligence attacked. Not with weapons. With reach. Something invisible slammed into the human ship, a probing force that bypassed matter, bypassed energy, going straight for the mind, the structure, the underlying pattern. It touched Daniel. And recoiled. For a fraction of a second, the Kazier saw what was behind him. Not fully. Not clearly. Just enough. Endless layers of human history, violence, resilience, madness, brilliance, all compressed into something that should not have been able to coexist. Wars stacked on wars, innovations born from desperation, horrors that had been turned into tools. And beneath it all, something older. Something humanity had found. Or maybe something that had found humanity. Something that did not forget. Did not forgive. And did not recognize the Kazier as anything worth understanding. The Kazier intelligence staggered. Ships across their fleet spasmed, their organic structures convulsing as feedback cascaded through their network. For the first time, they broke. Not physically. Mentally. Their coordination fractured. Individual vessels began to drift, their movements erratic, uncertain. They had tried to consume. Instead, they had tasted something that did not belong in the food chain. Daniel exhaled. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That happens." Behind him, the presence pressed forward, eager now. Hungry. Daniel's smile faded. "Not yet," he murmured. "It resisted." Of course it did. He clenched his fists, jaw tightening as he forced it back. "Not yet," he repeated, more firmly. "We're still pretending to be civilized, remember?" A long, tense pause. Then, reluctantly, it receded. Out in the void, the small human ship pulsed once. Gently. Like a heartbeat. The effect was anything but gentle. The Kazier fleet shuddered as a wave passed through them. Not energy, not force, but revision. Structures destabilized. Connections unraveled. The very logic of their biology began to fail. Ships didn't explode. They forgot how to exist. One by one, they went dark. Back on Earth, systems struggled to keep up. Feeds flickered in and out. Data streams collapsed under contradictions. Entire segments of the battle simply couldn't be recorded. But one thing was clear. The Kazier were losing. Badly. "Sir," an officer said slowly. "We're winning." Hale didn't look relieved. He looked uneasy. "Watch closely," he said. "Why?" Hale's gaze hardened. "Because this is the part where we usually go too far." Out in space, the Kazier intelligence made one final decision. Retreat. For the first time in their known existence, they chose to withdraw. Their remaining ships began to pull back, warping space in a desperate attempt to escape the system. Daniel watched them go. He could feel the presence behind him stirring again, eager to pursue. To finish it. To erase them completely. He closed his eyes. Took a breath. And made a choice. Let them run. The presence recoiled in irritation. Daniel didn't budge. "They'll remember," he said quietly. "That's enough." A long silence followed. Then, reluctant agreement. The small human ship dimmed. The impossible pressure in the void eased. Space began to behave again, tentatively, like it wasn't entirely sure it was allowed to. The surviving Kazier ships vanished into the dark, their retreat chaotic and broken. They did not look back. In the bunker, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Hale exhaled. "Stand down," he ordered. "But maintain observation." "Sir," the analyst hesitated. "What about that?" He gestured at the screen, where the small human ship still hovered. Hale stared at it. At the one thing on the battlefield that scared him more than the enemy ever had. "We close the door," he said quietly. A pause. "If it lets us." Out in the void, Daniel Cross opened his eyes. The battle was over. For now. Behind him, the presence lingered, watching, waiting, patient as ever. Daniel gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "They begged for mercy." He looked out at the empty space where the Kazier fleet had been. And we answered. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Because somewhere out there, in the cold dark between stars, the Kazier were still alive. And now, they were afraid. Mercy is not the same as safety. The retreat wasn't clean. It never is when fear is involved. The Kazié fleet didn't jump away in formation or disciplined withdrawal. They fractured. Ships peeled off in different vectors, tearing holes in local space as they fled, leaving behind scars in reality that took seconds too long to heal. Some didn't make it. They simply stopped existing mid-flight, as if the universe had grown tired of tracking them. In the wake of it, silence returned to the Sol system. But it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. On Earth, every screen that still functioned was locked onto the same image. A single human ship. Small. Quiet. Unmoving. The anomaly constructs, the monsters, as Command had begun calling them, hung back at the edge of sensor range. The choir drifted in slow orbit like a warning hymn left unfinished. Even the most aggressive of the deployed archives had ceased activity, as if waiting for permission. No one spoke for a long time. Then General Marcus Hale did. Confirm Kazié withdrawal. An officer nodded. Confirmed. They're gone from the system. A pause. And the rupture weapon. Silence. Then, deactivated. Self-collapsed during retreat. Hale exhaled slowly. On paper, that was victory. But Hale had survived enough wars to know paper never buried the dead properly. And our asset? He asked quietly. Everyone knew what he meant. Daniel Cross. The ship. The thing behind it. Another officer hesitated. Still stable. No expansion detected. No further manifestations. Hale nodded once. That's not comfort, he said. It wasn't a question. Out in space, Daniel stood alone inside the vessel. Or as alone as anyone could be. The ship around him was quiet now. The pressure, that presence, had receded, curling back into whatever impossible layer it came from. But it wasn't gone. It never really left. Daniel flexed his hand, watching the faint tremor in his fingers settle. You overdid it, he muttered. No answer. He sighed. Yeah, I know. Necessary escalation. Heard it before. Still nothing. Then, finally, a feeling. Not words. Just acknowledgement. Daniel shook his head. You're impossible. The battlefield beyond the hull was emptying. What remained of the Kazié fleet was scattered, broken, limping into faster-than-light escape corridors that looked more like panic than strategy. Humanity didn't pursue. Not yet. That decision alone confused many commanders watching the feeds. Why are we not finishing them? One admiral demanded over secured channels. We have them broken. General Hale stared at the tactical display for a long moment. Then answered simply. Because we don't know what happens if we do. That shut most of them up. Most. In the debris of the battle, something drifted. One of the anomaly constructs, the ones released from Earth's deepest sealed archives, floated slowly through the remains of a destroyed Kazié vessel. It paused. Then looked at the wreckage. Not with eyes. With recognition. A fragment of the choir's distant echo passed through it. Soft, almost curious. And then it did something unexpected. It healed. Not the ship. Not the Kazié. Space itself. The broken geometry around the wreck smoothed, as if the violence had been politely asked to leave. The ruin became stable. That terrified Earth's analysts more than the battle had. Because it implied intention. Not destruction. Judgment. Inside the bunker, a junior analyst whispered what everyone was thinking. Sir, what are those things? Hale didn't answer immediately. He had seen enough black projects to recognize the pattern. Humanity didn't just build weapons. It built answers. And sometimes those answers didn't stay answers. They're not things, he said finally. A pause. They're consequences. Far beyond the Sol system, the surviving Kazié fleet regrouped in the dark. What remained of their command intelligence had fractured. Multiple sub-minds argued within the collective, replaying the battle again and again. Not the human fleet. Not the anomalies. The ship. The small, quiet vessel that had not fought like anything they understood. It had denied them. One sub-mind insisted it was a weapon. Another insisted it was a prison. A third, newly formed, unstable, whispered something worse. That it was neither. That it was a threshold. And they had touched it. On board one drifting Kazier carrier, something unexpected happened. A wall. Not physical. Mental. A containment barrier forming inside their collective awareness. At first, they thought it was human interference. Then they realized. It was internal. The Kazier were splitting. Not politically. Not strategically. Conceptually. The idea of what they were fighting was breaking them apart from within. Some began advocating retreat beyond known space. Others demanded total eradication of humanity before further exposure. But the new faction, the one born from contact with Daniel Cross, suggested something else entirely. Silence. Avoidance. Survival through non-engagement. And for the first time in their species' history, that option was not immediately rejected. Back in the Sol system, the anomaly constructs began to disperse. The choir's last harmonic note faded, leaving behind a lingering resonance in space-time that made navigation systems behave slightly differently. More cautious. The larger constructs dissolved first, collapsing into nothing like dreams upon waking. Only one remained near Earth orbit. The smallest. The one that had been closest to Daniel. It hovered for a long time. Then turned. Not away from Earth. But toward it. Daniel felt it immediately. "They're still here," he murmured. The presence behind him stirred faintly. Not alarmed. Curious. Daniel frowned. "No. Don't even think about it." A pause. The presence pressed lightly. He groaned. "We are not adopting cosmic horrors today." Silence. Then. Reluctant amusement. On Earth, sensors picked up the anomaly's movement. "Sir," an officer said urgently, "one of the constructs is approaching geostationary orbit." Hale's eyes narrowed. "Is it hostile?" Long pause. "We don't think so." That was worse. The construct stopped above Earth's shadow. And did nothing. It simply observed. Like something trying to understand a species that had learned to build fire and never stopped escalating. After several minutes, it transmitted a single pulse. Not a message. A marker. A point of reference. Then it waited. Inside Daniel's ship, he watched the same thing. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. No answer. But for the first time, he felt something like distance forming between him and the presence behind him. A boundary. A choice. Not imposed. Offered. Daniel understood. "You're learning limits," he said softly. The presence did not deny it. Back in the shattered remains of the Kazier retreat, the species that had once believed itself unstoppable faced a new reality. Not defeat. Not extinction. Something far more destabilizing. Understanding. That humanity was not a single weapon. Not a fleet. Not a monster. But a system. Some parts merciful. Some parts curious. Some parts unbearable. And some parts uncontained. General Hale stood alone in the command chamber long after the reports stopped coming in. Victory reports. Damage assessments. Containment logs. He ignored them all. Instead, he stared at one line on the terminal. Unknown asset. Stable. He spoke quietly to no one. "We didn't win," he said. A pause. "We just proved we can still choose not to lose control." He turned off the display. Far away, in the cold between stars, the Kazier did something they had never done before. They stopped advancing. Not permanently, but deliberately. They began to observe. To learn. To wait. Because now they understood something fundamental. Earth was not a conquest. It was a warning. And humanity was not done being tested. In the silence after war, Daniel Cross stood at the edge of something vast and unseen. The presence behind him waited patiently. The universe held its breath again. And for the first time in a long time, humanity did not answer with fire. Only with awareness. And that was somehow more terrifying than anything that had come before.